Welcome to the video for attaching the zipper panels onto the Quilted Alice Shoulder Bag by Oro Rosa. And here I have my finished zipper panels, exterior and liner. And I've also have my two exterior quilted panels. You might have the tufted version, the rivet tufted version, or you may have chosen not to do any treatment on your main panels, but these are the ones that are going on the exterior. And then I also have my two liner panels that we just completed. I am going to set the liners aside for now, and I'm going to work on just one of my exterior panels. Now, what we're going to do with our zipper panel first is we're actually going to separate the zipper. We were told to do this in an earlier step, but I chose to keep my zipper together for that step. But now you will want to have these separated. So I'm going to just open that zipper up and separate these two. So here I have one half of my zipper panel, and I'm going to turn it over to the liner side. And I'm going to take the liner and just fold it over so that I can clip it out of my way. So I'm basically just folding the edge and clipping it to the actual zipper teeth. And this is just to keep it out of your way while you're stitching the exterior portion of the zipper panel. Nothing has to be lined up or anything like that. Okay, so if you flip this to the back, you can now see the wrong side of the exterior piece. And we are now going to be clipping this to the top curved edge of one of your exterior panels. And I like to start with the back panel. If this is your first time sewing this bag, you might want to start on the back so that if you mess up at all, it's not as noticeable on the front of the bag. And then once you have sewn the back, you can kind of get a feel of what it's like, and then you can move on to the front. So if you've been sewing a while, your instinct might tell you to fold this in half to find the center of the panel, but that's not going to work because the center of this curved edge is not right in the middle of the panel because this piece is higher on one side than it is on the other. So the actual center of this panel is not going to give you the center of your zipper panel. So we're just going to clip this from one edge around to the other edge, and I like to start on the higher side, this side here. So we're going to clip that right sides together with the inside curved edge of the panel, lining it up with the top, and just begin to clip. Now it's going to take some work to get this straight edge to curve around this top edge of the main panel. And I have found that it is easier to make this curve if you pull this top piece forward and sort of fold it kind of like this. Then your zipper panel kind of aligns itself a little bit easier with this curve. So you can see now it just kind of naturally stays that way because it's clipped in place. And so as you go around that curve, just fold more of the panel over and it's easier to line up those edges. And now we're going straight across. There's one portion of the top edge of the main panel that's just completely straight. So that's a little bit easier to deal with. And then we come to this curve here. And before I attempt to make this curve, I'm going to clip the end of the zipper panel to the top edge of the main panel, just so that I get that connection established and lined up before I attempt to clip around that second curve. And I'm going to put a second clip right here just to hold everything in place because it might shift a little bit as you try to finish this off. Okay. And We're almost ready. And there's very little easing in that you might have to do here, but you may have to just kind of adjust a little bit. Nothing too major though. Everything seems to line up very well. Okay, it's all clipped on, and you can see how the tops of my panels kind of want to fold forward a little bit, and that's all because of that curve. Now, if you've ever made an Oro Rosa pattern before, Alexis loves to use staples. And I think staples are an amazing tool to have in your sewing arsenal. They have a very low profile, so if you're worried about clips getting in your way as you're trying to move through your machine and you're worried about your clips hitting your presser foot, staples are a super good option for you. You want to make sure that you're keeping your staples inside the seam allowance though. So our seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch, so don't staple past 3/8 of an inch in from the edge. And what I find is that sometimes the staples don't clamp flat. Like if they're bumpy a little bit on the backside, make sure that you flatten those out with a pair of pliers or something before sending it through your machine. Now, all of that said, as much as I have loved to use staples in the past, I've actually found that I'm able to sew this without using staples. Now, staples are great, but I don't want to have to remove them after I'm done sewing. So I'm going to show you how to sew this with the clips in place. Now, in order to get this portion to lay flat against my machine bed, I'm going to fold up the bottom part of the panel. So now this part is laying flat, and I'm going to begin stitching at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Back stitch at the beginning. And then I've come to my first clip. And I just basically unfolded this just a little bit in order to make the next kind of couple inches of the main panel lie flat. Okay, and we're coming around this curve, so I'm going to take more of the bag and fold it back so that I can get around this curve. And you'll start to notice that the top edge of your main panel sort of lifts off of your bed because we're now approaching the curve. We're making this side of the main panel lay flat, so this one's going to want to lift. And it's all about sort of the behavior of the fabric. We're turning something that is flat, basically two-dimensional, into a three-dimensional object. So things need to kind of be folded in a certain way. So now you can see more of the main panel is getting unfolded, basically uncurled, as I go around this corner. Okay. And I'm keeping everything lined up, going rather slowly. So it's really lifted now. See how it's lifted there? Okay. Turning. And now we're going along the straightaway right at the top center of portion of the main panel. And we are approaching the next corner. So this part of my bag is sticking up in the air. And we're going around this corner. All right. Now I'm going to reach my hand through my machine and lift the panel at the back so that this side of my main panel wants to lay more flat as I'm going around this curve. So I'm lifting the back portion to allow this to lay flat. And I'm not pulling it through my machine. You should never pull the fabric through the machine, but I'm just lifting it and kind of guiding it through. And here I'm on my last clip. And I'm just gonna back stitch at the top. Okay, now as you can see here, my zipper panel is now sewn to my main panel, just like this, all the way around the curves. And the edge of the zipper panel is aligned with the top edge of each side of the main panel here. And we're now going to move on to the top stitching. So in order to do that, we have to trim through our curves a little bit. And I do this with pinking shears. If you don't have pinking shears, you can just cut notches around the curves. But I like to just trim this down by about half, being careful that you're not cutting through any part of the main panel other than the seam allowance. And you just want to go through those curves. Okay, my seam allowance was cut down by about half with pinking shears, so now it should be easier to fold this curved edge back on itself because the notches allow for that seam allowance to kind of open up and stretch. So now is also the time, if you have used staples, to remove the staples from your seam allowance so that you're not stitching through staples when you top stitch. And you also don't want to leave staples in your bag just in case down the road sometime the staple comes free and it might become sharp or dangerous to hold the bag. So very carefully, we are going to just open up that seam and we're going to stitch on the main panel through the seam allowance. So your seam allowance is going to be pointing away from the rest of your zipper panel. Okay, and the trick to this is just to go slowly. There's nothing else really to it. Just opening that seam up with your fingers as you go. And making sure that the seam allowance stays underneath your needle. So I just lift every once in a while and push that seam allowance underneath the main panel. And there is our top stitched back panel all the way around this curve here. All right, we are going to set this aside and do the exact same steps on the other main panel. right, here is the other main panel, the front main panel, all top stitched along the zipper panel. And now we are going to retrieve our liners and attach them to the other side of the zipper panel, the liner side. And we're going to attach them much the same way as the main exterior panels, but with a couple differences. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to decide which side of the liner panel is going to be against the back of the bag and which one's going to be against the front of the bag. Basically, do you want to have the zipper pocket kind of against your body when you're carrying the bag, or do you want to have the slip pocket against your body? It doesn't really matter. It's all preference. So for me, I am going to grab the slip pocket with the zipper pocket, and I'm going to put that against the back main panel. The other thing that you want to note is that on the liner, both of these tall pieces are the same height. And Alexis wrote the pattern that way so that you don't have to worry about accidentally mixing them up and doing maybe 2 short panels on one side and 2 long panels on the other liner panel. So instead, we're just doing all longs, and then after it's clipped, we can trim off the excess on one side. So whichever side needs to get trimmed will get trimmed after you clip this. So what we're going to do is begin to clip this liner panel to the zipper panel liner, but we're going to start on the tall side of the exterior. So I'm going to flip this around and put the liner panel right sides together with the exterior panel, and then I'm going to pull the zipper panel liner out so that I'm working with the raw edge of the liner on the zipper panel, and I'm going to align this top edge, and again we're working with the long side of the main panel, and we're going to align the top edge and the raw edges and clip those together. And we're going to clip this much the same way that we did for the main panels, but it's most likely going to be a bit easier because the liner tends to be less bulky than the exterior does. And that's why I like to sew the liner on second and the exterior first. So again, we're kind of curling that main panel over so that it's easier for the zipper panel to make the curve of the liner panel. All right, we have now come to the last curve of the main lining. And like I said before, this is the short side of the main panel, but this edge is as long as the other edge. So what I like to do is actually flip this to the back and draw a line on the wrong side of the liner about 2 inches down from the top. So 2 inches down from this edge here, and I draw a line. That is roughly where the short side of your main panel should fall, right at that line. So I'm going to take the zipper panel liner and I'm going to line it up with that line, still right sides together with the main lining, and I'm going to clip that. And then we can continue down this curve, and you may need to do a little bit of sort of easing in here, which is totally fine. All right, here is our main lining all clipped to the liner side of the zipper panel, and I am now going to stitch this in the same way that we did for the exterior panel. All right, I have sewn both of my main liners to the zipper panel liner on both sides, and the pattern instructions say not to top stitch this edge like we did on the exterior side. Not to top stitch this edge. You can if you want to, it's totally optional, but you don't have to, so opting not to is totally fine. Now is the time where you are going to trim off the top of the liner that is protruding above the top of the bag. So I'm just going to trim that off. Make sure I'm not trimming stitching and I'm not trimming the other side of my panel. Okay. And I've already done this one as well. And we are now going to move on to finishing the exterior of the bag.